Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com, and today we're going to be discussing 5 tips to help you crush weak passive players. These are players who typically make up a lot of the small stakes games. These are players who, when they decide to put money in the pot, they typically have a good hand. These players will call raises pre-flop, stick around, and if you make it cheap, they'll get there on you and draw to whatever junky draw they have. And it's important that you recognize how to beat these players, because if you can't beat these players, you're not even going to progress beyond the smallest stakes. So let's get right to it. The first tip is to bet when checked to. Realize weak passive players play in an honest manner, right? When they bet, they think they have a good hand. When they check, they don't think they have a good hand. Now, you have to figure out how your specific opponent plays their draws. So, some people will raise with their draws. Some people will just check call with their draws. But it's very important that, especially when you have a hand that wants fold equity, when your head's up, when they check, you're applying pressure. Now, you're going to find that usually these players will call against tiny bets, but will fold against big bets. So you want to be using bigger bet sizes in general. This is where a lot of people who blindly follow solvers get in a lot of trouble, because they'll just bet small because they have a range advantage and a nut advantage, but that's not good enough. These players will stick around with all sorts of stuff, and you don't really want to give them amazing odds because they're not really messing up by calling tiny bets, right? So you want to make sure that you are leading these players to make errors. And if you can get them to fold everything besides top pair with a pot size bet, that's going to result in them folding out 80% of their range or more, which is clearly just going to print money for you, right? So don't be afraid to fire big bets. Now, when I say big, I don't mean just mindlessly blast with your good hands. I mean primarily when you want them to fold, right? When you want them to call, choose bet sizes that will result in them calling you. So remember, we're not trying to play some GTO strategy here. We are trying to take advantage of perhaps the worst type of player in the game, those who just play super straightforwardly. I know some players think that playing, they call it ABC poker, is good. They're not getting out of line, they're not getting in trouble. But in reality, these are the players who you will print money against because they play straightforwardly. And the easiest way to bet people who play straightforwardly is to just steal every pot when they don't have anything good. Also, you want to be betting big on scary boards. As the board gets more scary, can't type, most weak passive players will fold to substantial bets. So say the flop comes 7-6-3 and then the turn's an 8, a 9, or a 10, or a 5, right? A card that makes obvious straights out there. A lot of these weak passive players will start folding out even weak overpairs or one pair hands, right? Especially if the turn brings a 3 flush and the river brings a 4 flush. If they don't have a flush, they are literally never calling any bets. And some of these players will even fold flushes. I was playing just the other day in a World Poker Tour event at Borgata, and my opponent flopped a straight. They turned a flush, and then the river put out a 4 flush to give them something like a 6-high flush. They checked, I bet, medium size with a bluff, and they just proudly folded. I'm like, what in the world is this guy doing? Don't they realize they're getting good pot odds and I am capable of bluffing? And they don't realize that. They're just playing straightforwardly, and they think, hey, 6-high flush, fold every time. And when players think in this manner, it's going to allow you to print money just by blindly being aggressive when they check, because their checks indicate weakness. You may be saying, like, whenever you check, doesn't that supposed to indicate weakness? Isn't that supposed to be weak? And the answer is, yeah, it's supposed to be weaker than your bets. That said, you want to make sure your checking range is balanced by including some hands that you just know you're not check folding. This is going to be hands like top pair bad kicker, middle pair. They can easily just call down. So you want to make sure that you are not a weak passive player, because if you're a weak passive player, you are the one who is easy to play against. And you may find that if you are stuck in the small stakes games, it's perhaps because you are just playing way too straightforwardly. Something else a lot of people have a problem with is that they will try to study, they'll try to learn at poker, right? And they will look at solvers and they will see that you're supposed to be betting with a hand, let's say 40% of the time, 30% of the time, even 60% of the time. And they say, okay, that's not every time, so I'm just going to check it every time. And clearly, that is a big mistake. If you always take the passive action or the action that doesn't put money in the pot, especially with a hand that really wants fold equity sometimes, you are just leaving a ton of money on the table. Do not be afraid to get in there and battle, especially against players who are betting every time you check, right? So, whenever you have a hand that is marginal, like let's say you raise ace-7 and your opponent calls and the flop comes 8-7-3. You raise from middle position, your opponent called big blind, flop comes 8-7-3. They check, you bet, they call. This is a spot where when they check call, they're going to have a whole lot of draws, top pairs, maybe middle pairs, maybe worse. Say the turn completes a flush. Say it's like a jack, right? This is a spot where normally, if your opponent checks and the turn is a third flush card and it's a jack, that's a pretty good spot to check on 8-7-3. But this is a scenario where a lot of these weak passive players will fold everything besides two pair and better to a turn bet. So even though they're not necessarily folding out a giant chunk of their range, they will still fold out a lot of hands that you beat, mainly their eights, right? Some of them will even fold out top pair if they happen to have a random jack, especially say if the turn's a queen or a king putting up the flush. That's a scenario where you definitely want to be turning your middle pair into a bluff, which is a little bit counterintuitive to a lot of people because from a GTO point of view, you very often want to be checking your marginal made hands, and you should against good players, but we're not playing against a good player. We're playing against players who fold too often. So there are going to be many spots where you bet with a wide range on the flop, and then you end up with something like middle pair or bottom pair on the turn that would naturally like to be checked behind. But against these players who will just fold out the vast majority of their range to a turn plus a river bet, by betting the turn in the river, you just end up winning almost every single pot against these players, which is quite powerful. So instead of just winning whenever it goes check, 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 and you have the best marginal hand, you now are winning 90% of the time when they don't have a flush by the river. Next, when a weak passive player raises you, get out of their way. Remember, they put money in the pot with their best hands, right? So whenever they are raising you, or check raising you, or re-raising you pre-flop, whatever, if they're applying aggression, they have something good. So only stick around when you are getting the right odds to draw to whatever your draw you're drawing to, when you're getting great implied odds, right? Like say you raise to 3 big blinds and they make it 8 big blinds from the big blind and you have pocket threes and you're playing 100 big blinds deep, it's fine to call there because you're getting great implied odds. Or if you flop a straight draw and they check raise you on the flop and you're in position getting good odds, you can stick around, right? Those are scenarios where you do want to stick around. But if you have a hand like top pair, like say you raise pre-flop with king jack and they call from the big blind and it comes king, queen, 9. They check, you continuation bet. If they raise you, you have top pair, you have a gut shot, but when they check raise you on king, queen, 9, you may already be stone dead. They could have a hand like king, queen, or jack 10, right? And even though it's like drastically under defending to fold in that scenario, if their check raising range is literally 2 pair and better, it's unfortunate, but you got to fold. You must be disciplined and get out of the way when it's just clear your beat. And this is how you absolutely crush the small stakes games. I spent a decent amount of time playing 1-2 No Limit in preparation for a book I released a while back called Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Cash Games. And there were so many times where I would just bet top pair, get raised by a weak passive player, and then fold. And nobody ever knew about it. It's not like I'm bragging about making these folds. I'm not showing it like, haha, look how good I am. Just quietly fold, move on with your life. While at the same time, whenever they are checking and showing weakness and check calling and the board gets scary and the board gets even scarier, we're barreling and just winning every single pot where they don't have anything. So it sounds almost, I guess, old school to say, you're playing the player, but we really are just playing the player. The players who are weak and passive and generally straightforward are so straightforward to the point that they are telling you with their actions that they have a good hand. So don't be hard-headed. Listen. I mean, very often when I am teaching my students at pokercoaching.com, they'll hear me say, this is the top of your range, you just can't fold. And that's because against good players, you really cannot be folding the top of your range because they are going to be bluffing the appropriate amount of the time. But against small stakes players who are making egregious errors of only raising with the nuts, well, if you have top pair, top kicker, that's not the nuts and it's nowhere near it. So don't be afraid to get out of the way. You must be disciplined to beat these players. Next, realize that some of these players are extreme calling stations on the river. Now, very often you will find that most of these weak passive players will fold most of their non-nut hands to a flop plus a turn bet. So what does that mean? It means when they call a flop plus a turn bet, they either have some good draw that they will fold to river bet, or they have a hand that they think is so good, usually top pair, top kicker, an overpair, two pair, something like that, that they are not going to fold to any amount of river aggression, even if the board gets scary. Now, sometimes it'll get extremely scary and you should just still go for a bluff. But a lot of these players, if they have a hand like pocket aces and it's 9, 8, 6, queen, and you bet the flop and bet the turn, and they call the flop and they call the turn, or you check raise the flop and they call the turn, they're just not folding. They don't care. They have aces, right? They didn't sit there playing tightly and passively all day just to fold their aces. So that's the time where you should probably not be bluffing them. And you need to make a point to figure out when each specific opponent will fold the majority of their range. Like, where do they really start playing straightforwardly? And I think you're going to find that for the most part, that's usually on the turn. And a lot of these players have in their mind that if I call the turn, I have to call the river. And that's not a good thought process, but that is how many of these players think. Next, you want to make sure you bet an amount that makes them feel like their stack is at risk. Most of these players are playing, I'm not going to necessarily say under bankroll, because a lot of them have a day job, right? And if they make $5,000 a month at their job, they can, in theory, afford to lose $600 a month on poker. But a lot of them just really don't want to lose their stacks with non-nut hands. They didn't really go to the casino to gamble. They went to the casino to socialize, hang out, try to make the nuts, and trap someone who's bluffing off. So you want to make them feel as if they are at risk. So make sure you're choosing bet sizes that make them feel at risk. And this may result in you betting larger or smaller than the bet you would normally like to make. So typically you're going to find that you want to leave your opponent with roughly a pot-sized bet going to the river. Maybe a little bit more if you want to overbet, maybe a little bit less if you want to bet a little bit smaller. But say the pot's $100 and you both have $300 left. In that scenario, you don't want to bet $100 on the turn, because if your opponent calls, they're only going to have a 2/3 pot-sized river bet left, and very often players will call off the rest of that 2/3 pot-sized river bet on the river. If you instead bet something like $50 on the turn, now they're going to have $250 left on the river, and the pot will be $200. And at that point, you can make an overbet on the river, and a lot of people look at even small overbets as very suspicious and very strong in general. Like, why would you bet so big unless you're just trying to get me to call? Not realizing the other side of the coin, why would you bet so big unless you're trying to get me to fold, right? So you want to figure out what looks strong to your particular opponent and then do that. And very often you're going to find that most of these players really just don't want to go broke, because many of them don't have any more money to get out and reload. And those that do still just don't want to pull out more money and reload. So to recap, here are the 5 tips to crush the weak passive players. 1, bet when checked to. 2, make substantial bluffs when the board gets scary. 3, when they raise, get out of their way. This might be the most important one right here. Do not pay them off poorly. 4, understand they will often call on the river once they call a flop and turn bet. And 5, use sizes that make them risk their stack, or at least feel like you will make them risk their stack on the river. If you enjoyed this presentation, you will definitely love my site, pokercoaching.com. There we have over 600 interactive hand quizzes and loads of challenges to help you improve your skills, as well as a lot of classes like this, but generally a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth. And I have 2 ways for you to improve your game at pokercoaching.com today. You can go to pokercoaching.com right now and sign up completely for free for a trial membership. We have quizzes and classes and challenges waiting for you right now. Or if you want to save big on a 1, 2, or 3 year membership to the full experience, go to pokercoaching.com/savebig. At pokercoaching.com, we have loads and loads of material that will help you take your game to the next level. Here's Ken right here. Ken recently won the event number 18 at the Maryland State Poker Championship on his birthday. Congrats to Ken. And we are having students crush on a regular basis. Just the other day, my dad, a poker coaching member, won a tournament. So congrats to my dad. So here's what you're going to get if you use code SAVEBIG. There are over 600 interactive quizzes, 40 plus challenge webinars, 20 video classes kind of like this. Also, there are 4 new quizzes every week, and you get to attend live webinars and video classes that will help you take your game to the next level. So go to pokercoaching.com/savebig right now to sign up. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you did, click like, click subscribe, and use the link below to sign up to pokercoaching.com. Good luck, have fun, and I'll talk to you next time.